Hello, everyone. My name is Jared Altick, and I'm a chaplain with the police department. The Hey Chaplain podcast is the place where members of the law enforcement community share their wisdom and experience through me, the chaplain, so they can encourage others who wear the badge. Today, we're talking to a recently retired detective from Scotland Yard, former detective inspector Steve Keogh. Steve spent 30 years working as a cop in London, much of that as a detective investigating murders and other violent crime, as well as the first suicide bombings in the UK. Steve's passion was solving murders by understanding the mindset and patterns of a killer, and he continues to teach the lessons he learned to people around the world. Today, Steve explains what Scotland Yard is and shows us why it's synonymous with world-class detectives. Make sure you catch the TV show that first inspired him to find his calling, the effect on him from working 2 weeks straight on a suicide bombing in London, and the advice Steve gives regarding your law enforcement career and emotional well-being. Here's former Detective Inspector Steve Keogh. Hello, Steve. How are you today?
Hi, Jared. Yeah, I'm really good. Thank you for having me on.
Wonderful, wonderful. I've been really looking forward to this. I am really excited to hear what you have to say about Scotland Yard and your career as a police officer in the UK. Could you tell me how you got started? Did you always want to be a police officer?
Funnily enough, no. When I was a youngster, it was one of those jobs where you kind of think in the background, oh, that looks interesting. But no, when I left school, I was training to be an accountant. Which was just so dull. Honestly, I was so bored.
It is probably safer.
Well, yeah. I mean, the odd paper cut, but apart from that. But it was within a very short space of time, I just realised this wasn't for me. And my offices where I was working at the time were right opposite our court in London, the main court called the Old Bailey. It's where we send most of our murderers. And there was lots of comings and goings. It all looked very exciting. And there was a particular TV program on at the time that I used to watch about the police. And it all just seemed so much more interesting than what I was doing. And I kind of got drawn into it through that. And I probably ended up doing about a year of accountancy, waiting for the application to go through and being accepted and getting to training school, etc. But when I got to the police, I just realised that this was for me. I just found my place. It was brilliant. I loved it. Did 30 years, and never once did I look and think I was doing the wrong thing. I look back now, and I've got no regrets whatsoever.
Oh, that's fantastic. So when you begin training, what does that look like? Is it a type of academy or a type of school that you go to for police training in London?
Yeah, it's all changed, and I don't want to be one of those old policemen that look back and it was so much better in my day. We have a term in London. We call it swinging the lamp. It's when the old coppers talk about how much better it was back then. But in many ways it was, and certainly when it comes to training. So I did 20 weeks at Hendon Police College. And you packed yourself off on a Sunday night, and you get to come home at the weekends. But you did 20 weeks there, and you stayed there, you lived there, sleep there, etc. And it's not like that anymore. So I've got two older children who have joined the police.
Oh wow!
And their experience of training is completely different. So now it's like going to a college. So you go there during the day and you go home at night. It's just not the same. And I feel sorry for them because it was a real experience for me, and it was a real good grounding for going out and starting in the police. And it's and ultimately what it boils down to is money. It costs a lot of money to run a big training school and put people up and everything. Sure. And over the years, they've cut down on budgets, and it's those sort of things that really have suffered.
You said that you watched a TV show before you became a cop. What TV show was it?
Oh, The Bill. The Bill. It was as real to life, I suppose, as you're ever going to get about the life in the Metropolitan Police. Although when you get there, you realise it's not. And on a training school, because we all lived there, it was always on a Wednesday night at 9:00, and the TV room would always be full a Wednesday night at 9:00. All the young prospective police officers looking at how it should actually be carried out on the bill. It was funny.
Sure. Yeah, British murder mystery TV shows are a big thing over here, and it's not uncommon. Oh yeah, and going back decades. We watch stuff that was out years and years ago, and also including new stuff as well. But it's not unusual for us to be, having a holiday with our relatives, like my in-laws, and we'll sit down for an entire afternoon and watch 4 or 5 hours of murders happening in England, which seems to be a really dangerous place according to the TV shows. But maybe that doesn't actually bear truth.
Yeah. No, if Miss Marple's around, you don't need to be worried because someone's gonna die. It's the opposite. It's the opposite here. We all watch American programs. Like I mentioned The Wire earlier. I'd love The Wire. It was one of the best programs I've ever seen. I loved it. Because I don't watch UK programs about murder investigation because it's a busman's holiday, isn't it? And they're getting so much wrong. Because I can't just sit there and just turn off and think, because you look at it and think, oh, that's rubbish. Whereas with an American one, I can watch it.
Yeah. I have the same problem here.
Yeah, because you've got a frame of reference. I don't know what it's like investigating murders in America, so I can sit and watch a program, and it's just entertainment for me. I'm not sitting there thinking, well, that wouldn't happen.
That's funny. I think we just discovered something. Yes, that's amazing. The police in London are called the Metropolitan Police. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
And when you begin your career there, do all Metropolitan Police, do they all start out in basically patrol, or is there some diversification for what your initial assignments might be?
We have an expression, certainly as a detective, you would call it uniform. So you have uniform and detectives.
Okay. Right.
And you would start out in uniform, you'd start out on the street. 99%, and I say that because we've got a bit of an issue in the UK as a whole, not just in London, of a shortage of detectives. People aren't finding it as appealing as they used to years ago. And one of the ways they got around that is to try and recruit people in directly as detectives. It's a very small number, but they do that. We have a 2-year, it's called a probation period. So the first 2 years, you tend to spend that time on the street before you can specialize.
Sure. And how long did you spend on the street in uniform?
I did about 6 years.
Did you enjoy it?
I did. And so I came into the police quite open-minded. And being a detective wasn't high up on my agenda. It wasn't really something I thought about. In actual fact, what I wanted to be a dog handler.
For sure.
With a police dog. That was one of my early things. But I kind of I realised very quickly what it was I enjoyed, and essentially it was arresting people, and it was going after bad people, and there are lots and lots of different ways you can serve the public. But to me, the thing that really got my juices flowing, if you like, what I really enjoyed was that challenge of going out and finding a criminal and arresting them. And because of that, I ended up gravitating towards becoming a detective, because ultimately that is what that's about, isn't it? It's about, there's a crime, you have to find the person who's done it and essentially put them in prison. That dragged me more towards being a detective than anything that I had any preconceptions before I came into the police.
Is there a testing process to become a detective? How does that work there?
Yeah, if I'm gonna compare the old days and the current days, and for me, it was when we were coming through. It was really quite difficult. You had to prove yourself first as we call it a thief taker. So you have to prove that when you're in uniform, you know how to go out and arrest people, and you'd end up on squads where you would. Drug squads, burglary squads, that sort of thing. And you had to sort of prove yourself before you can apply and become a detective. Unfortunately, it all comes back to what I was saying before about the shortage of detectives. They've made it much, much easier. So if you can imagine, if someone can come straight in from working in a supermarket to become a detective, that's essentially what you can do now. Those within the uniform, again, if they just put their hand up and say, I want to be a detective, it's much, much easier than it used to be. I find that a bit sad, because it kind of detracts from what it was hard to become a detective, and you had to really work to do it. And I'm not saying that the detectives now are any less able. My daughter's a detective, and I know she's a very good one, but it just feels that they handed it out a little bit easier. And for me, it took away a bit of the kudos, I think.
Sure. Yeah, there's a bit of prestige coming with having to go through so much to earn it. And so, yeah, the bigger process. Nice. And that means something in a group of people. There's always that culture of this was hard earned, and this uniform, this title or promotion means more because of what it took to get there. And so once new paths to come into that spot are created, it takes away from some of that meaning.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
When we hear as Americans, when we hear Scotland Yard, we have this vague familiarity that this is something to do with really important police work somewhere in England, right?
Yeah.
And we really probably don't have a clear picture of exactly what that term means and where it comes from, other than just being exposed to it in books and movies. So can you explain what Scotland Yard is, and how is that any different, or is it the same? Or tell me what that is as far as your career.
Yeah, so Scotland Yard essentially is the name of the headquarters of the Metropolitan Police. And it dates back to, off the top of my head, I think it's something like 1829, the Metropolitan Police was formed.
Okay.
And they had a headquarters not far from, right near to the Houses of Parliament, around Whitehall, around there. And there was a public entrance that the members of the public would go into if they wanted to go in and speak to a police officer. And that was at the rear. And that was in a street called Great Scotland Yard. And so members of the public just kind of called it Scotland. It just got the name Scotland Yard. Then when they moved from that building to a new one, that building became New Scotland Yard.
Even though it wasn't on that street anymore.
No, and it just kept the name, and it has always since. And it's gone to about 3 or 4 different places, and it's just followed. I mean, in reality, it should be like New Scotland Yard and new. That would just be silly, wouldn't it? So it's just kept the name New Scotland Yard. And what it used to be would be the place where the central office was. So it would be the detectives that would deal with certain high level crimes. So, for instance, terrorism and then murder and that for years and years and years, that was the case. So in the early 2000s, I was on our anti-terrorist branch, so I'd be investigating terrorism, and we physically worked out of New Scotland Yard. Now, the latest one is quite small. It's right next to the Houses of Parliament, and it's essentially is just a place where senior officers work. So the top police officer in London is called the Commissioner. So our one's just recently retired. She worked there, and you'd have a lot of senior officers there. But the name kind of is stuck. And so when we talk about centralized detectives, so people who are investigating murder, terrorism, that kind of thing, they are described as Scotland Yard detectives. None of them actually work from Scotland Yard. It's what everybody just knows them as, and it kind of, I suppose, it just differentiates the specialist detectives from the local detectives that would be investigating robbery, burglary, etc., a local division. That's it, really. And it's got a lot more mystique. And it's actually a bit of a boring answer, really. It's just like, it's a building that got its name from a street. And I think the mystique that goes with it is actually a bit disappointing when you drill down on what it actually is.
Does that mystique still exist? Is that something that, if in the culture there, if someone says Scotland Yard, does that still carry that same kind of mystique and panache and that kind of thing? Or because like I said, we see a lot of movies and stuff, but some of that's very dated. And so I don't know if that's still a current thing, or is my exposure to it in this country kind of dated?
No, it's not, because if you, for instance, if you were to read a news article about a murder, they would refer to the officers investigating it as Scotland Yard detectives.
Oh, okay.
So it's not, even within the UK, it's something that is still used. So I call myself a Scotland Yard detective, and I suppose maybe I'm just playing on a kudos of it. I don't know. But it just means more, I think, to people externally than if I just said I was a London detective. It's the same thing, essentially. Right. But if you're calling yourself a Scotland Yard detective, what you're essentially saying is that I was investigating something more specialist, murder, terrorism, etc.
Well, and we do that in other places in life. If you're talking about theater, it's Broadway or the West End.
Yeah.
If you're talking about, finances, it might be Wall Street, those kinds of, or specifically a street that is used to denote, an entire industry or what have you. And so Scotland Yard, I think we've got that down. So can you tell me, after you became a detective, what path did your career take? I mean, you did some pretty interesting things, really.
Yeah. So when you become a detective, and this is still the case now generally, I think, you have to get a ground in. And as I say, you do that at a local police station. So I worked in South London at a police station called Peckham. And in a city, quite a rough place, to put it bluntly. So it's a good ground in for investigating shootings, stabbings, rapes, a lot of serious crime, but obviously not the terrorism and murder, etc.
Right.
And we have a system, we had a system of jobs would be advertised every week. It would be like a little booklet would come out, and it'd have the jobs in there. And there was a job for the anti-terrorist branch, and I was kind of like, "Oh, that sounds." My whole life just seems to be me saying, "Oh, that sounds interesting," and following. And that's what I did with this. It was like, "Well, that sounds interesting," and it was. And I applied, and it was really difficult to get onto. Actually, at that time, I think there was something like 70 detectives. Only a small unit, so I wasn't really expecting to get on it. I thought I'd apply. Quite often, what you would do is you apply first time, you don't get it, and then you apply the second time. But I got it first time. I was quite surprised and got on, and it was good. I enjoyed it, and did some really eye-opening things. And I only stayed for a few years before I then got promoted and left on promotion. But just before I left it was in 2005. And in July 2005, we had the worst terrorist instance that we've ever had in London. That was 7/7. Yeah. So I was heavily involved in that. So I went to one of the scenes at Edgware Road, and colleague and I, we were the first anti-terrorist branch officers to turn up. We got there. It was a bit quiet by the time we got there. The injured people had been removed and taken to hospital, etc. So it was all quite calm. And we got there, and we never actually left for 2 weeks. We just stayed there for 2 weeks, and we were responsible for the crime scene. So that would involve removing the victims, the deceased victims, and then treating the whole of the train track and the train as a crime scene. When I look back on my career, it was the hardest thing I ever had to do. Literally on your hands and knees, picking everything up from a bomb scene.
Wow. And so I hate to say that people might not remember 9/11 or 7/7, but we're getting a few years away now. Can you describe what happened in just broad terms?
Yeah, so it was in the UK. It was the first ever suicide bombers. I actually got involved in this. So the first ever British suicide bombers were a pair called Hanif and Sharif, and it was in Israel. And we were involved we dealt with their family over here. So they were the first ever suicide bombers. So we were trained. We were a sort of hangover from the old IRA days. And the IRA's methods were completely different. And we were trained to deal with car bombs, really. So we would go down to a big army base, and they'd blow up a car, and we would we would deal with the scene there. We weren't really prepared, I have to be honest, for what was to come. And what happened was, it was rush hour on a Monday morning, and there were four bombers in total. 3 went to London Underground and they were on the underground trains, and 1 went to a bus, and they all detonated bombs there. And as I say, it was the first suicide bombs, and we didn't know at the time. And it took us a little bit of time to realise. We just, in the back of our minds, we thought it could have been. And then when we realised that it was suicide bombers, it was quite scary, actually, because the IRA did some terrible things, but they almost played by different rules.
Right.
And this was the most callous I think we'd ever seen, where you could imagine rush hour trains, people can't go anywhere. The devastation that caused, that was really hard on not just us, but on the whole of London. It was like a game changer, really, when it came to terrorism.
Wow. So you said that you got promoted out of that unit. Where did you go next?
Back to a local unit as a detective sergeant. I only did about 3 years before I left. So I did half of that was dealing with robbery, mostly sort of muggings in the street. That kind of that's what we class as robbery, and then on a sexual offence, so a rape unit. So then half dealing with rape. Did that for I think about 3 years, and then applied for murder, and that was 2009.
Okay.
And once I got to murder, I never left. It was, it was, I was talking about finding my calling. Joining the police, I felt was my calling, but then dealing with murder, we call it murder, obviously in the States you call it homicide, was really truly my calling, and it was the best thing I've ever done in the police. And once I was there was nothing else I was going to do. I loved it, and I got promoted again. So detectives, I went there as a detective sergeant, got promoted as a detective inspector. I think I left for about 6 months to a gangs unit dealing with firearms and stuff. But as soon as I could get back, I got back, and it was just a fantastic job. I know in the States you have detectives investigate a murder and it might be their case. We don't have that here. We have teams. And in London, there are 20 murder teams, and all murders will be investigated by them. And it's about 20, 25 detectives altogether would investigate a murder.
Okay.
And they're known as murder investigation teams.
Has it always been organized that way, or is that something that developed like during the time of your career to work on it as a team instead of just one or two detectives?
During my career, it's always been the same. What has changed is the teams used to be ad hoc, and they would be pulled in from different departments, and a team would be formed. Right. But in the early 2000s, they made them permanent. Okay. Before, I joined in 91, and it's always been that way since then. I don't know how far back that goes.
Is there a typical kind of murder in London? I mean, in the U.S., we have a lot of shootings. It's not all of them, but it's a large number of homicides happen because of a gun-related crime, and the people die by gunshot wound. But in my impression is that that's not a common thing in the UK. And so what kind of murders were you dealing with in London? Was it strangulation, knife, blunt object? Was it kind of all the above? What was a typical London murder for you?
So just before I answer that, we talk about firearms, and what I find quite interesting is that there hasn't been a homicide by firearm in London for 6 months. Which for a major city, that's quite amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
So it's not common. I mean, in my career, I dealt with a number, but by far and away, the most common was knives. Stabbings. Simple fact that knives are so much easier to get hold of than guns. We're a little island. We've got very tight gun control laws. We're an island, so getting guns into the UK, I mean, it happens, but it's not easy.
Sure.
So there aren't that amount of guns floating around. Certainly not as there used to be, and we were very proactive in taking them off the streets. So it's knives, and then if you were to break that down, I would say the two most common types of murder that I dealt with would be gang related.
Okay.
Because we have a problem with gangs in London, or mental health. Mental health is something that we dealt with an awful lot, and I don't know why. I suspect a lot of it. And before I was talking about budget cuts, it's not just the police that have suffered from budget cuts. A lot of the health services have as well.
Sure.
And those were the two most common ones. And the mental health ones I always found quite sad, because what it tended to be quite often would be someone close to the killer would be the victim. And so many times it would be the same story. So, for instance, it would be a son who's suffering from really poor mental health, and his mum would be asking for help. And it would be the mum that would end up being the person being killed. It happened so many times. I found that really quite sad.
You did homicide investigation, did murder investigations for a number of years. Did you feel like there was a learning curve to understand the mind of a person who kills, or did you just really understand that quickly?
Yeah, I mean, I did 12 years investigating murders, and it was the whole 12 years was a learning curve. I was up until the week before I left, I was still learning. I'd never investigated a murder, and I had to learn from those around me to really get an understanding. I knew how to investigate serious crime, and I knew the basics of the whole process. But actually understanding why people kill and getting inside people's heads, and that was definitely a learning curve, and it was a steep learning curve at the beginning. Because you see things on telly and you might read things in books, but actually getting into a murderer's mind when you're trying to catch them, I would be lying if I said I found that easy. It took me a while to get into. People leave evidence trails, and you just got to know where to look for them. And so, for instance, one of the pieces of evidence that I always found really useful was telephones. People give themselves away on telephones, the way they act afterwards, the way they act before.
How do you mean?
So there are two types of murder. There's ones that are planned and ones that are spontaneous. And if you know what you're looking for, so if someone's planning a murder, they will act in a certain way. So, for instance, they may try and mask their phone behavior, because everybody knows, we've all seen The Wire. We all know that police will look at your phones if you're involved in criminality. And people try and mask that. But by doing that, they interrupt their normal behavior. So they may try and be ultra clever and leave their phone at home. And if you catch someone on CCTV, for instance, and you can see it's them, but their phone is being called miles away, you can say, well, you've left your phone at home. Or once they've committed the crime, they'll stop using their phone. And it's like they're using their phone 100 times a day. A murder happens and suddenly their phone stops being used. That kind of thing. And you're pretty sure the person you're looking at has just killed someone. Who's the first person they call straight afterwards? Why are they calling that person? Because you've just killed someone. In your mind at that time, that's your full focus, and then you phone someone. Well, that phone call is going to be really, really important, isn't it? So it's like when you look at their phone usage, their patterns before, their changing patterns, what are they doing afterwards? It's those kinds of things, and then where are they going afterwards? If you want to get yourself in the mind of a murderer, where are you likely to go? Where are you likely to try and get rid of your clothing, or if there's a weapon, and all right, you're never going to know completely because not everybody thinks the same.
Right.
But you've got to give yourself the best chance. You've got to think, well, what would I do? Where would I look? What have I seen before? And when you've started to investigate enough murders, you kind of, as I say, not everybody's the same. You're not always going to see the same pattern, but you'll see. But there are patterns. There are patterns of similar type behavior, because people need to do things. They need to get rid of the clothing if they've got blood on them. They need to go on the run. Where are they going to go? There's all kinds of things that murderers will do after they've committed a murder, and there tends to be, you can't not 100% everyone's going to do the same thing, but when you've dealt with enough, you kind of know where to look.
That's fascinating. You have acquired all this knowledge. But like a lot of cops, you don't really have a lengthy career. There's not a lot of 70-year-old police officers. And so you're reaching the end of your career. And did you have an idea of where you might go when you became a former DI?
Yeah. So do you know what? The one thing that was in my mind was I didn't want to work for anyone again. And this way, I was just after my 20th birthday. So I've spent my whole adult life being told what to do, where to go, when to be there. That was my drive. My drive was whatever I do. And then it was like, so what am I going to do afterwards? And my biggest passion in life is homicide. The last 12 years of my career, I loved it. I thought, I don't want to let that go, but what can you do? I mean, unless I'm going to become a hitman and use those skills, do you know what I mean? I'm not. Where else am I going to go?
Don't turn to the dark side. No.
or an advisor to criminals. You know what I mean? Which I'm not going to do. So I stumbled into, and a lot of what I do in my career wasn't quite planned. It just, in my life, it wasn't quite planned. It just kind of, and I ended up writing a book. I ended up writing a book on how Scotland Yard investigate murders. And I'm still not 100% quite sure where that's going to go.
The name of your book, what was the title of that?
It's called Murder Investigation Team, How Scotland Yard Really Catches Killers. My retirement date was the 1st November 2021, and the publication day for my book was the 1st November 2021. I did it straight away. Because I self-published, I did it all myself. I could just press publish. And essentially what it is, it goes from crime scene to the court trial and the process that we go through in order to investigate murders and solve murders. And I link it into cases I've dealt with. So it's not like just a manual on how we do it.
Right.
If I'm talking about
personal stories and
Yeah. So if I'm talking about a specific way of solving a crime, I relate that to a case and how we use that.
So you said you were working on a second book. Do you have a title for that yet?
I don't know, but it's you'll love this. It's about Jack the Ripper and how that would be investigated today. Yeah, it's
fascinating.
It's looking if Jack the Ripper was to have occurred today, how would that be investigated? And also looking back at how it was investigated and some comment around that and stuff. So, but it's early days for that.
Do you have a personal theory about who he was?
My personal theory is not going to sell books, I'm afraid. My personal theory, I don't think it will ever get solved. Okay. I think there are a number of names that get associated with Jack the Ripper.
Well, it's very sensational to assume it was someone famous and that they got away with it. That there's some sensationalism there. There is,
and the way I look at it is, the best you're going to get is for yourself to be convinced, and if you reach a point where you're convinced, then great. Even today's murders, I mean, if you have a famous murder in the States, is everybody, even when they're convicted, is everybody convinced that they're actually guilty? And that's when it's been through a court system with modern day evidence, etc. So you're never going to get to a state where everybody accepts that Jack the Ripper was such and such. So if you yourself can get to a point where you're convinced, then great. That's the way I see it. I ended up with my own YouTube channel.
Yes, I've seen it.
Yeah, and it's just I don't know where that's going to go. It's just something I've done, because a lot of what you see on like true crime is just a minefield, isn't it? And you see so much absolute rubbish getting talked about, and there's not an awful lot out there of people who've actually been involved in the process and well, actually, this is how we do it. So it's a bit of that. I don't know where it's going to go. It's just been a bit of fun, really, and
I watched your videos to prepare for this interview. And my impression watching, first I thought you did a great job, very professional.
Thank you.
And also I thought that this would be really useful if somebody were writing fiction. This would be good training to get things right, to understand the mind of a killer, that kind of thing. It seemed like your material, even just in that short YouTube format, I thought, man, this would be really useful for somebody in their preparation to write a murder story.
Yeah, appreciate that. Thank you. And also as well, I mean, I purposely keep them short because people have short attention spans.
Yes, especially on YouTube. Yes.
Yeah. So I just kind of just no more than 10 minutes. I call them murder bites, and they're just like little bits about murder investigation and how we do it. For me, there's an awful lot of skills that police officers have. Like, and actually, another thing that as I was coming out and I was thinking, well, what am I going to do? I kept reading on Facebook groups and people giving advice about transferable skills. Police officers have transferable skills that will be useful to out in the outside world. And I was kind of looking at it, well, if those skills are so useful, rather than just be, how can I help you? What about if I go out and teach those skills? So it's early days yet, but one of my plans is to go into businesses and some of the skills, that's particularly around decision making and problem solving, that is the real essence of being a police officer and a detective. I think we're very, very good at it. So rather than just saying, "Oh, can we be good for you?" What about, well, why can't we teach you why we're good at it, and then you use our skills in your life? So that's it's early days for that. So, but I got to be honest. So these are all my plans. So I wrote my book and I self-published. I don't know if the audience probably aren't aware of all the intricacies of how books get into bookstores, but essentially there's two ways of doing it. You go the traditional route where you go to a publisher's and they give you some money and you write a book, or you can do it yourself and you employ an editor, a proofreader, and you do everything yourself. So I did that. I ended up on a daytime television program in the UK, which is really quite popular, and just plugging my book. And
right.
My book in UK on Amazon in UK was number 2 seller, and it got a bit of attention. And I got approached by some publishers who said, "Look, we'd like to buy the rights to your book," which I did. And then they've asked me to write a second one, so I'm doing that now, and it's actually I'm really enjoying the lifestyle of being an author, because I've done what so many detectives and police officers do. We're not great at marriage, are we? we end up with a broken one. So I've got my 2 kids that are in the police, but I've also got 2 younger ones where I've started again later on in life. And the writing of the book is good for my lifestyle, because I'm there for them in the morning. I'm there for them when they come home from school.
Wonderful.
Yeah. And in reality, the first time around I wasn't. And your audience will know what it's like. You having a balance in that family and the job is really difficult. And my kids missed out. Or I missed out, really, not my kids. I missed out on a lot of my kids' life. So it's nice that I've not got to do that now.
Well, you couldn't have done too badly, because there's hardly any greater endorsement of a father than to see your kids, follow your footsteps into that same career. And so they can't have too negative a view of law enforcement if they themselves became cops.
No, and I'd like to think there's a reason for that. So I don't know what policemen are like or police officers are like in the States, but over in the UK, we're a cynical bunch. I mean,
it's exactly the same. Yes, yeah.
If we can have a moan, we'll have a moan. But I was always very positive about the police, because all right, it's not all great, and there are its downsides. But I love my career, and I think they picked up on that and they saw that, and that helped them, that drew them towards it. And I think both of them enjoy it and have not regretted it.
Yeah. In the United States, the murder rate in some of our major cities is maybe 10 or 20 times higher per 100,000 than what you have in the UK. What do you think would be different if you had been a homicide detective in New York City or Chicago? What do you think would be different about your career and how you personally approached it? If the volume of murders was way higher, like 20 times higher, what do you think would have been different for you?
Right. What I enjoyed the most about investigating murders was solving them. And traditionally in London, we have about a 90% rate of solving them. And a lot of that is to do with the fact we don't have as many. So in a year, we probably have 120, 130, something like that. Mm-hmm. I think I would have found it more frustrating, definitely not solving murders. I found that I always took that quite personally when we didn't. I think that would have been hard. I think obviously the type of murders would be different, and firearm murders are harder to solve. Mm-hmm. And a lot of that is to do with the distance you have between suspect and victim. So if someone's stabbing someone, you have to get up close and personal. There's a good chance you're going to leave forensic evidence behind. If someone's 20, 30 yards away, there isn't going to be that exchange. So straight away, it's more difficult. I would imagine it's more challenging, and we obviously get more time to investigate each murder. So each team would probably only get about, at a maximum, 10 a year. So you do get more time to investigate them.
Yeah, there are homicide detectives listening to this right now in the United States thinking only 10 cases a year.
Exactly. And that's between 20 detectives.
Yeah.
So it allows you to really get in, and we've got this saying of giving it the Rolls-Royce treatment, and that's what you try and do. You try and give every murder a Rolls-Royce treatment. Sure. And I think I would find it quite frustrating if I wasn't in a position to do that. So I do feel for people that have got a pile of homicides on their desk and it's never going down and just getting added to. I find that quite hard.
Yeah. Do you have any wisdom or advice for fellow police officers in the United States, UK, Canada, South Africa, wherever they may be? What advice do you have for surviving and thriving in a law enforcement career?
So I suppose if you look at it in terms of having a career, I always think have an idea of where you would like to go and what you would like to do. I know it sounds like I stumbled around, but I've always I've had a slight idea of what I want to do, and it's always been about putting people in prison. And it's like, if I focus on that, whatever your career, where you want your career to go, have that in your mind, because you have some days when it can get quite dark, and you can end up with doing some roles as well where it's not good. And if you have that end goal in mind, you go, well, I'm going to get through this because one day I'm going to be doing this. And that has always helped me focus on some of the jobs I've been doing. I'm thinking, like, this is really, really, I'm not enjoying this at all. But it's only short term, and you've got your long time goal. In terms of your mental health, I don't think I'm very good, because I address this in my book, actually, because like, for instance, dealing with the bombs, I say I spent 2 weeks on my hands and knees picking up bits of body and whatever. And at the end of it, my friends and family were worried, and they were like, "How are you? Are you all right?" And I was completely and utterly all right, and I didn't feel affected at all. And afterwards, I was thinking, right, is that right? Should I not be? Do you know what I mean? Should there be more? Should I be more stressed about it? Should I be more concerned? And I was actually more concerned that I wasn't affected. And I started thinking, have I lost some part of me? Have I lost some part of my humanity?
Have you become desensitized? Or
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then I realized, no, that's what I have to do. I can't let my emotions get in the way of me doing the job, because people have died, and we need to try and find justice for those people. And my feelings is not going to help that. So I just lock things away. I just don't deal with things. And I don't know if that's a healthy way of dealing with things. So for instance, my dad died a few years ago, and I don't deal with feelings. I lock them away. I don't. If I don't think about it, it's not there. Mm-hmm. And that's how I deal with things. But the problem is that can come out, and when you actually then have to do. So I did my dad's eulogy, read out some words at his funeral, and I was a mess. And the reason is because I'd written down on paper my feelings for my dad and my life with him.
Yeah.
And then I was talking about them, and not just talking about them, I was talking about them in front of 100 people or whatever. Yeah. And I was just a mess. And it's because I don't do that, because I don't talk about my feelings. I don't know if it's generational or my background. I don't know. I can only talk about myself. And I was just raised in a way where men don't talk about their feelings. My dad didn't. I don't. Right. It's almost like you don't have them. Clearly you do, but you just don't. You don't acknowledge them.
When you watch your oldest children, do you think that they handle their emotions, or maybe speak about how they feel better than you did?
Yeah, I think they probably do. I think they probably just come from a different generation where it's more acceptable. I like me crying. I don't cry, but when I did, I couldn't control it because I'm not used to that. So I just was a complete mess, because I'm dealing with feelings I don't deal with. I'm crying, I don't cry. Well, how do you stop it? I don't know. And as I say, I don't think that's possibly the healthiest way of dealing with things. Now, when I first joined the police, counselling was not a thing. When we dealt with the bombs, the anti-terrorist branch at that time was quite a male-dominated, quite a macho place to be, and we got all put in a room, and someone walked in and said, "Does anybody want counselling?" And so, well, who's going to put their hand up? You know what I mean? I don't.
Right,
I'm all right. Yeah, and we didn't, and I know that at least 2 or 3 people that were with us ended up really quite poorly with their mental health, because they weren't dealing with everything was getting buried, and it was a hard thing to do. Now, that was 2005, and in 2021 there was a police officer was shot in London, and my team investigated it, and it was really unusual. Police, I'll tell you what, actually, just as an aside, since I've been on LinkedIn and I've got a lot of law enforcement connections in the States, I've been absolutely shocked at the level of police officers getting shot and killed in the States. I wasn't aware of it, and it's almost on a daily basis I see that, and I find that really quite shocking because obviously we don't carry firearms in the UK. We have firearms officers, but I've never picked up a gun. I wouldn't know what to do with one. So we kind of, I feel like I'm in a bit of a bubble here compared to what's going on in the States. So it was really quite shocking for us to have a police officer being shot and killed. And there was a huge change from that time in 2005 to then. And the organisation couldn't have done more for us. And they didn't just offer us counselling like in a room full of people where no one's going to say it. They offered it privately, and not just once. And if you said no, they come back again. And I think I was asked about 3 or 4 times, and which is brilliant, isn't it? And that's the way it should be. We should be looking after ourselves, and we should be looking after our officers. And I think I can't even speak for the Met Police, and we've been shocking at it. We've been really bad. And I'm pleased that that's getting addressed.
I wondered, in your experience, did you ever see police chaplains with the Metropolitan Police? Were they part of your day-to-day experience at all? Did you know them by name?
No, I didn't. They were probably there, same with the counselling was, and if you want them, they're there. But there isn't a proactivity in, certainly wasn't a proactivity around people's looking after people's mental health. That may have changed. I don't know, but I do know they're there.
We're hoping it changes here. As some of our departments have had chaplains for a long time, there's other police departments that don't really have any active, certainly not any proactive chaplains. Maybe they have a chaplain to, pray at a ceremony or something, but they don't have chaplains that actually know the officers. And we're trying to change that. We're trying to get where there are people who have something to offer in regard to officer wellness and mental health. And they are a day-to-day or at least a week-to-week presence where the officers know them, they have familiarity, they have rapport, and it's not a stranger coming in after the fact and helping. There's a place for that. I mean, you can't ask a psychiatrist to spend all of his time at the police station.
No.
But if we can get some of these helpers in place and have them there beforehand, we're hoping we can prevent some suicides, we can save some marriages, maybe we can help with the overall wellness picture. So
yeah, there has to be something, doesn't it? Because police officers being asked to do a job that 99% of the public would never even in wildest dreams do, and police officers being asked to do it on a day-to-day basis, and they deserve that support.
Well, thank you very much. I sure appreciate your talking to us about Scotland Yard. That was awesome.
No, thank you, Jared. I really appreciate it. I enjoyed chatting to you.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, Jared. I really enjoyed this. Thank you. Let me know when it's out.
Absolutely, I will. I'll be in contact with you.
All right.
Thank you so much.
You take care, mate. Take care. Bye.
All righty. Bye-bye. Thank you, Steve, for the great interview, and Godspeed on this next chapter of your life. I also want to thank Claire Sands from the Silent Why podcast for recommending Steve Keogh. In fact, both Steve and I were interviewed for separate episodes of The Silent Why, which were released back-to-back. The British Murder Detective and the American Police Chaplain, talking about murder, tragedy, and coping with loss. Make sure you download those episodes today. Also, please go to Amazon and buy Steve's book, Murder Investigation Team. This isn't a paid sponsorship. I just think you'll benefit from reading his book and listening to Claire's podcast. The links are in the show notes. On the next episode of Hey Chaplain.
I have to tell you that when I told Sarah we were going to be doing this, I said, yeah, the chaplain asked me to do the podcast with him. And I was like, I recommended ours. And she goes, Morgan, you recommended our podcast to a chaplain?
I said, you told a man of God to listen to our podcast? Are you kidding me?
Now, admittedly, I listened to about 3 episodes and I stopped what I was doing and Googled how to bleep out foul language.
Yeah, we've done pretty good, though.
You've done great today. You've done really well.
Yeah.
You've done really well. But
we just decided, because we've been forensic nurses so long, we decided we wanted to start a podcast that kind of talked about things that we've learned over the years about forensic nursing. But because forensic nursing is not something fun to talk about, We keep it very light. We are potty mouths.
Yeah.
Potty mouths. I mean, my grandma listened to, I think, the first 2 episodes and was like, I can't do this anymore. Yeah.
The views expressed here are the personal views of the hosts and our guests and do not necessarily represent the views of any law enforcement agency or its components. If you liked what you heard here, please share this episode with a cop or someone who loves a cop. Thank you for listening today, and as always, pray for peace in our city.